morning Calloway Brent Ashmore told his wife to get out of his house, he was wearing the cufflinks she had bought him for their 8th anniversary. She noticed that detail right away. She noticed it the way you notice something that makes no sense. The way you stare at a word for too long and it stops looking like a word. Josephine Ashmore, 37 years old, structural engineer and co-founder of Meridian Design Collective, stood in the foyer of the house she had helped pay for and listened to her husband tell her, in front of his mother and in front of the woman he had been seeing for the better part of a year, that their marriage was over. He did not look sorry. His mother, Vivette Ashmore, 61, matriarch of the Ashmore name, and a woman who wore her disapproval like a second skin, stood near the staircase with her arms folded and her chin lifted. She had been waiting for this moment for years. The other woman's name was Blythe. She was 30 years old and worked at the Ashmore family's development firm, Ashmore & Pell Construction Group, as a senior account manager. She sat on the edge of the living room sofa and said nothing, but she did not have to. The way she sat, relaxed, like the house already belonged to her, said everything. Calloway handed Josephine a manila envelope. Inside were divorce papers, already drawn up. He had used a lawyer she had never heard of, in a firm 3 towns over, someone his mother had recommended. He said he wanted things to be simple. He said he wanted to move on. He said, and this was the part that stayed with Josephine the longest, that he had never felt like she truly understood what he needed. Josephine looked at the envelope. She looked at Calloway. She looked at Vivette, who had never once called her by her first name, who had spent 8 years finding small, quiet ways to make Josephine feel like an intruder in her own marriage. Then she looked at Blythe, who finally looked away. Josephine set the envelope on the console table near the door. She picked up her bag. She said very calmly that she would have her attorney contact his. Then she walked out. She did not cry until she reached her car. She had met Calloway in Atlanta 11 years earlier at an industry mixer hosted by a small architecture firm downtown. She was 26, sharp, 3 years out of Georgia Tech, with a civil engineering degree and a reputation for being the youngest person in any room to understand load-bearing mathematics at a structural level. He was 32, charming with his father's last name on a construction company that had been doing mid-size residential and commercial work in the Southeast for 2 decades. They talked for 2 hours about nothing and then about everything. He called her 3 days later. They were married 2 years after that. What Calloway never fully understood, what he never made much effort to understand, was that Josephine had not married into a family business. She had her own. Meridian Design Collective was hers from the beginning. She had co-founded it at 28 with her college roommate Farron, a structural architect who worked mostly on the design side, while Josephine handled the engineering, the permits, the technical compliance. They started small. By the time Josephine married Calloway, Meridian was pulling in contracts from county governments and mid-tier commercial developers across Georgia and South Carolina. Calloway knew about Meridian. He just did not take it seriously. To him, it was something Josephine did, a professional hobby, something that kept her busy while he ran the real business. His mother Vivette had encouraged that interpretation from the start. When they had family dinners and someone asked what Josephine did, Vivette would say, "She does some design work," with a kind of vague warmth that made everything sound smaller than it was. Josephine learned to stop correcting her. She learned a lot of things over those 8 years. She learned that Vivette would never see her as enough. She learned that Calloway was the kind of man who loved you easiest when you were grateful and became uncomfortable when you were capable. She learned that the Ashmore family operated on a specific hierarchy that no one ever said out loud but everyone understood, and that she was always going to be near the bottom of it, regardless of what she built or earned or contributed. She also learned to keep certain things close. Meridian's 3rd major contract had come from the city of Greenfield, a mid-sized municipality in the Piedmont region of North Carolina that was redeveloping its downtown corridor. That contract had led to 2 others, then a state transportation project, then a partnership with a regional investment group that wanted to develop sustainable mixed-use properties across 3 counties. Josephine and Farron had brought in a 3rd partner, a quiet, methodical man named Doss, who handled their financial structuring, and the 3 of them had reorganized Meridian under a parent holding company they called Vantage Group. Vantage Group did not advertise. It did not have a website with partners' names on it. It had a registered agent, a corporate attorney, and a set of LLCs that held its various projects with clean separation between them. This was not unusual in commercial real estate development. It was, in fact, standard practice. But it meant that when people tried to find out who was behind the Greenfield project, or the transit corridor expansion, or the upcoming Hartwell Commons development, they found the name of a holding company that didn't tell them much. None of this was something Josephine had planned as protection. It was just how Farron had structured things from day one, because Farron had grown up watching her parents' business get picked apart in a very ugly divorce, and she was not interested in making the same mistake. Josephine had agreed at the time. She had not known then how relevant that decision would become. When Callaway handed her divorce papers in February, Vantage Group had just submitted a competitive bid for the right to acquire and redevelop the Ashmore family's largest commercial asset, a 12-block mixed-use portfolio in downtown Hartwell that Ashmore and Pell Construction Group had been quietly bleeding money on for the past 3 years. The portfolio was called the Hartwell Block. It had been Callaway's father's crowning achievement. It was now the source of the family's most serious financial problems. Josephine had known about the acquisition opportunity for 4 months. She had not said a word to Callaway, not because she was planning revenge. She was not built that way. She had known about it because her firm had been approached by a commercial broker who knew Vantage Group's track record in urban redevelopment, and the opportunity made financial sense. She had flagged a potential conflict of interest to Doss and their attorney. Both had reviewed the situation. Both had confirmed that as long as the bid process was handled through proper channels and Josephine remained separated from any direct negotiation involving her husband's company, there was no legal conflict. She had thought for a while about telling Callaway, not about the bid specifically, but about Vantage, about how large Meridian had grown, about the fact that what he casually described as her design work had quietly become something that employed 23 people and held a portfolio with a market valuation north of $40 million. She had thought about it, and then she had watched Vivette dismiss her at Christmas dinner, watched Callaway not correct her, watched Blythe refill his wineglass with a familiarity that did not belong to a work colleague. And she had decided that the time for that conversation had probably passed. The divorce process was, in its early stages, exactly what Callaway had described he wanted: simple. Josephine hired her own attorney, a woman named Breck, who did not believe in being nice when being precise was more effective. Callaway's attorney, the one Vivette had recommended, was used to small-town family law and was visibly surprised to discover that the opposing counsel was sharp, well-prepared, and seemingly uninterested in making things easy. The first complication arose 3 weeks in, when Breck requested a full disclosure of marital assets. Callaway's side submitted documentation on the Ashmore family businesses, the properties, the accounts, standard process. Then Breck submitted Josephine's financial disclosures. There was a long silence from Callaway's attorney's office. Callaway called Josephine directly that evening. It was the first time he had called since she moved out. "What is Vantage Group?" he said. It was not quite a question. "A holding company," Josephine said. "You own it?" "I co-own it. With Farron and Doss." "How long?" "Since before we were married." He was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you tell me?" Josephine was quiet, too. She was sitting at the kitchen table in the apartment she was renting on the north side of the city, a clean, spare place with good light that she had found in under a week. Because she was efficient and because she had learned in the last 8 years that she was very capable on her own. She looked at the window. "You never asked," she said. Then she hung up. Callaway's next move was predictable. He and Vivette began pushing the narrative that Josephine had been deliberately concealing assets throughout the marriage. Their attorney sent Breck a letter insinuating financial deception. The implication was that Josephine had hidden the true scale of Meridian and Vantage Group in order to shield them from marital property considerations. Breck responded with documentation. Vantage Group had been incorporated before the marriage. The holding structure was filed with the state, on record, publicly accessible to anyone who cared to look. Meridian's business filings had been submitted annually and correctly for 9 years. Josephine had paid her taxes. Everything was in order. There was no concealment. There was simply a business that Callaway had never bothered to learn about, because he had decided early on that it wasn't worth his attention. The letter from Callaway's attorney stopped coming after that. The Hartwell block bid closed in late April. Vantage Group was not the only bidder. There were 2 regional development groups and 1 national firm that had submitted proposals. The municipality's review committee spent 6 weeks evaluating them. Josephine was not part of the evaluation process, by agreement. She had removed herself from that subcommittee of the bid from the beginning. The committee selected Vantage Group in early May. The news went out through a press release from the city of Hartwell. It named Vantage Group as the select developer for the Hartwell block redevelopment, a project expected to bring significant investment to the downtown corridor over the next 4 years. It did not name Josephine. It did not name Farron or Doss. It named the company. Callaway saw it before he connected the dots. He forwarded it to his mother with a message that said the Ashmore family should consider whether they had any leverage to appeal the decision. Vivette called her own attorney. Her attorney, after some research, called back. The attorney told Vivette that the principal of Vantage Group, the individual with the largest ownership stake, was Josephine Claire Ashmore, currently in divorce proceedings with Callaway Brent Ashmore. Vivette called Callaway. Callaway called his attorney. His attorney called Breck. Breck told them what they needed to know, which was that the acquisition was legal, the process had been above board, and the conflict of interest review had been completed months ago. There was no claim to make. There was no appeal with merit. Vivette did not accept this easily. She requested a meeting. Josephine, on Breck's advice, agreed to a single meeting in a conference room with both attorneys present. Vivette walked in looking the way she always looked, immaculate, composed, wearing the expression of a woman who believed that her disapproval was a form of authority. She sat across from Josephine and looked at her the way she had looked at her at 100 family dinners over 8 years, like Josephine was something she was tolerating. "You planned this," Vivette said. "Not a question. I submitted a competitive bid," Josephine said. "You knew we were selling the Hartwell block. It was announced publicly. The bid process was public. You did this to embarrass us." Josephine looked at her. 8 years of small dismissals. 8 years of being called the wife in conversations where her name was known. 8 years of watching this woman position Callaway to see her as less than she was. She let the silence hold for a moment. "I did this," Josephine said, "because it was a sound investment." Vivette's expression shifted, just slightly. Something moved behind it that Josephine had never seen before. Not anger, exactly. Something closer to a reckoning. "Callaway built this family," Vivette said. "Callaway's firm holds debt against 3 of the 7 properties in that portfolio," Josephine said. "I've already reviewed them. My team is prepared to restructure the development plan to make them viable again. That's what the city is paying me to do." She folded her hands on the table. "You should be glad it was my company that won, and not the national group. They would have cleared the buildings and started over." Breck said nothing. She didn't need to. Vivette left the meeting early. She did not say goodbye. The divorce was finalized in August. Callaway had wanted it simple and fast, and in that respect, he got what he asked for, though the simplicity was more expensive than he had anticipated, because Josephine was not interested in a settlement that undervalued what she had contributed, financially and otherwise, to the life they had built. Breck was very good at making sure the documentation reflected reality. Callaway moved in with Blythe. His mother announced the relationship to the family with a warmth she had never once shown Josephine. There were no hard feelings, Vivette told people. These things happened. Josephine did not go to those conversations. She was by that point in Hartwell 3 days a week, overseeing the early-stage planning for the block redevelopment. She had hired a site manager and brought in a landscape architect she had worked with on the Greenfield project. She had also quietly extended an employment offer to 2 longtime Ashmore and Pell staff members who had been let go when the company restructured in the spring. She had not done this to be unkind to Callaway. She had done it because they were good at their jobs and she needed people she could trust. The day the Hartwell block groundbreaking ceremony was held. In the first week of October, Josephine stood at the corner of Marsh Street and Tillman Avenue in a hard hat and steel-toed boots while the city's deputy mayor gave a speech about investment and community and the future of the downtown corridor. There was a small crowd, a few local journalists. The mayor's office had a photographer. Farron was standing to her left, looking pleased. Doss was on her right, checking something on his phone. Callaway was not there, but Vivette was. She had come to watch. Josephine noticed her on the edge of the crowd almost immediately. The upright posture, the folded arms, the same expression she had worn for 8 years. She stood near the barricade that the city had set up along the sidewalk. She was watching. After the ceremony, after the shovels and the photographs and the handshake shakes, Josephine walked in Vivette's direction. Not because she had planned to, not because she had anything to prove, but because she was done letting this woman stand at the edges of her life and look at her like that. She stopped a few feet away. Vivette looked at her. "I didn't think you'd see me," she said. "I always saw you," Josephine said. A moment passed, a long one. The crowd was thinning out around them, people moving back to their cars, the photographer packing up his equipment. "He's not happy," Vivette said. It was almost quiet. "Callaway. He realizes now." She stopped. Josephine waited. "He didn't know who you were," Vivette said. "No," Josephine said. "He didn't." She picked up her hard hat from where she had set it on the barricade. "Neither did you." She turned and walked back toward the site. Behind her she could hear nothing. No response, no footsteps following. Just the sound of construction equipment and the street and the city going on around the thing she had built. Farron caught up with her at the trailer they were using as a temporary site office. How'd that go, she said. Fine, Josephine said. Farron looked at her. Did you say something devastating? I said what was true. Farron smiled. That's usually more devastating anyway. Josephine pulled open the door to the trailer and stepped inside. On the table was a set of revised plans for the block's second phase. 7 buildings, a public plaza, a redesigned streetscape. Her name was on the cover sheet. Her company's name was on the cover sheet. She sat down and uncapped her pen and got back to work. She had a city to build.